Hello and welcome to the Cine Skinny, film podcast from the people behind the Skinny magazine. I believe Peter Simpson describes us as the only good podcast, and Peter's word is gospel around here, so I'm going to say the same. We're back at EHFM, who just turned 5 last week, so happy birthday EHFM, and thank you to Jamie Pettinger and the team for having us again. So you probably realised by now, I am not Peter Simpson, I'm Jamie Dunn. Peter is off on a well-earned break, but I am joined again in the EFHM studio by Ellie Robertson.
Hello.
Hi Ellie, how's it going?
I'm good. It's cold.
It's freezing, it's absolutely freezing.
We've been talking about this a lot.
And now the Traveller returns. Annie Rose, how's it going?
Hi, I'm good. I'm also cold. I bought these little fingerless gloves for the protest on Saturday, and I feel very like Dickensian.
You should be feeding some birds.
I also have a pair of fingerless gloves over here, and I swear by them because
they're kind of sick.
they
really
keep
like
your
them.
hands warm enough, and you still have fingers available for touchscreens and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And generally, like actual gloves just make me feel very claustrophobic, whereas there's just something about like it not feeling untidy and closed.
They kind of look killer as well.
Yeah, they do look really cool. I feel like I'm gonna, I don't know, set fire
You can
to something.
type,
Yeah,
roll cigarettes.
exactly. It's sexy. Yeah,
And here you've been away in London.
I have.
Yeah, maybe more on that later, shall we?
Yeah.
So Peter's missing a cracking episode this week, I think, because we're going to be talking about one of the most anticipated films of the year. It's certainly one of my most anticipated films. That is Killers of the Flower Moon from Martin Scorsese. We're also going to be talking about the films of Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. They're receiving this kind of lavish retrospective by the BFI right now. So you're going to be seeing a lot of Powell and Pressburger films over the next coming weeks. So we're taking the opportunity to talk about them. But before that, what has everyone been watching? Annie, we mentioned you've been in London.
Yeah, I was at the London Film Festival, so I have actually for once watched some films, which is very exciting, I think, for all of us. What did I watch? I saw the new Jonathan Glazer film, Zone of Interest, that is quite genuinely one of the most fucked up things I've ever seen in my life. Like, really horrible. Like, really, really horrible.
Like more fucked up than Under the Skin?
Yeah, I think so.
Nice.
I think because it's real, right? So it's like based on the Martin Amis book, Zone of Interest, but really loosely, because I think that has loads of like intersecting narratives, and they've also like fictionalized the names, whereas here like it's about like the commandant of Auschwitz, the person that was the longest in command there, called Rudolf Höss. And it's actually like he is named in it, like he's like this kind of historical figure, but it kind of takes place as a like domestic drama of like him and his family, and then in the background there's just like smoke coming out of like the concert. Like, it's really fucked up. It has one of the most horrific scores I have ever heard in my life. It's Micah Levi. Yeah. It reminded me actually in big parts of it of Nope, and in particular that specific scene in Nope where everyone gets sucked up into the alien. There's that bit where you see them in the stomach and they're screaming and the score is doing something. It's that, but a whole film. And it's like really, but it's so good. It is really like an incredible piece of filmmaking, but very upsetting. Speaking of upsetting, I saw All of Us Strangers, the one with Andrew Scott and Paul Mescal. I cried so much. It's so upsetting. It's so like deeply, deeply sad. My friend Anna, who I was there with, was like, yeah, film festival, especially press screenings, are so weird because you're there at 8 a.m. with your like very expensive cup of coffee, like down in caffeine and just like sobbing at this film. Which, when else in your life would you do that? It's such a like weird, like liminal space. But it is incredible. Like, really, it's the new Andrew Haigh film. And that was amazing. I watched, which is my excuse for not having seen Killers of the Flower Moon, because the same day that was showing at London, Steve McQueen's 4.5-hour documentary Occupied City was also showing. And I thought it would be better to watch that than Killers of the Flower Moon, which does come out this week, which is like shows, it's just like filming done in Amsterdam during lockdown, and over it is a voiceover of wherever it's like being filmed, like the site of it. It talks about what happened in that site during Nazi occupation and kind of like the Jewish people that died and the resistance. And so it's like this kind of history of like the city and like this kind of geographical area, but told through this kind of like trauma narrative. And yeah, it's really, that was like beautiful. May December fucks. That was really fun. The Royal Hotel is really good. Eileen is like a great time. Saltburn is like incredibly silly. Yeah, It was just like good.
So basically 2 Holocaust films and
Yeah.
the rest like
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, yeah. I think there may have even been, was there another Holocaust film as well? No, it was that I went to see Cabaret.
Ah.
Like the theatre show Cabaret, which had Self-Esteem as Sally Bowles, and that was really great.
Oh wow.
But yeah, it was so good. But there is this point in it where obviously like everything's happening, it's all like really exciting, and it's all like everyone's in their like sexy gay little underwear, and then that one person that's been doing the smuggling takes off his jacket on stage, and underneath it is like the swastika, and it's the first time that's introduced. And I've never seen an audience go like more still and tense like in a second than when that, like, it was such a good piece of staging. So that was also very fast.
Is there something else cool in that? Is who's the MC in that?
It's the lead guy from Scissor Sisters.
Yes, Jake Shields.
interesting.
Yes, yeah. Yes, it's like
Very
really
poppy cast.
Yeah, it's very very queer, like very gay. But it's really I really like that. But yeah, that was the other kind of fashy Holocaust narrative thing that I saw. So yeah, very intense week, but like really good films actually. I would say better overall in quality than Venice, which was nice.
Ellie?
I've not been to the London Film Festival, and I have been watching nothing related to the Holocaust. I've just been like, I mean, I've been at home. TV's been good. Last season of Sex Education, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
The new season of Ghosts, very funny. Good time, good season for TV. But I would say that the only thing that I've watched recently of note is that I had a film night with some friends and we saw the Super Mario Brothers movie, not the new one, not the animated one with Chris Pratt, the Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo one that sort of like lives in infamy because, you know, it was supposedly so terrible and had absolutely nothing to do with Mario that Nintendo didn't make another movie for another 30 years. And here's the thing. I had a blast. This film is so fucking weird. It's like Wizard of Oz meets Fifth Element. Hoskins and Leguizamo are meant to be ordinary Brooklyn plumbers, but already they're quite weird because they've got like plungers mounted like trophies in their apartment, and then they get sucked into an alternate reality where people evolved from dinosaurs and not primates, and it's this like gritty cyberpunk world that's overgrown with like gross fungus because it's meant to be the mushroom kingdom. It's got these big action set pieces. There's like 5 car chases. They escape from prison on a zip wire. There's a very like tall, beautiful dominatrix who like steals their magic key, so they have to go to this really like glam rock nightclub to get it back from her. And like, it's crazy. The whole film looked like so much fun to film. And it's so surprising to learn that apparently Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo got drunk every single day of filming because they hated the directors. They were a bickering married couple who were like ruining the vibe. And I just think that like, yeah, it is kind of just this glorious dumpster fire, but compared to this animated one that came out earlier this year with Chris Pratt and Charlie Day is the Luigi, it's like, you know, so sanitized, it's so devoid of personality. There's like not a line spoken in that film that's not just been borrowed from a Mario game. Because the thing about Mario is that like he doesn't really say anything. He says wahoo, and that's it. Like
Exactly.
as a character, like he doesn't have much to give us. But because they've just gone so like weird in the 80s and like not really attached themselves to the Mario identity, it's just very like vivid and ambitious. And if you're looking for something that's like, you know, different and ahead of its time, and maybe in like a, not necessarily like a scary film, but a good film for like the sort of spooky Halloween season, just like a really bizarre costume film, then check out the original Super Mario Brothers movie.
Well, I would have Bob Hoskins over Chris Pratt any day of the week.
Like truly.
He's great. It's great as Mario. Again, it's just like, he's just running. He seems to be so out of place. He does not know what's going on. I think that he also like stopped doing like family friendly roles after this because he'd also done like,
Roger Rabbit.
he'd done Roger Rabbit. He'd done Hook. He was in Hook, and
Who was he in Hook?
he was Shmee.
Oh yeah, of course.
But he apparently was just like, I want to be a serious actor. I hate all this shit. Like, but he's fantastic in it. He's so much fun.
I also didn't make it to London Film Festival, but I did go along to a few of the screenings at GFT, and I
It
concur
was a
that
good like lineup.
yeah, and I totally concur about All of Us Strangers. It's one a funny film where it's like, it's not just one big sob. You know how usually a film builds like a big catharsis. This is a film that's just like gentle sobbing all the way through, like an absolute cacophony throughout the audience, which is kind of which is more fun, I think, is like because it starts you off. I think sometimes just hearing people cry kind of starts me off. So I think I'd maybe been okay at some points, but then just the woman behind me was crying, and so this got me started.
Yeah, it's a very like universal film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also cannot wait for us to talk about Saltburn because it's such a trashy, trashy fun movie, but also kind of terrible at the same time. It's
Dumbest fucking film.
It's so much good. It's really good fun, but God, it's bad as well at the same time. It's like, and I just want to look at that ending. It's so good, you know.
Yeah.
But to talk about a film I have seen just recently, I rewatched Rob Roy, weirdly, which I hadn't seen since I was a kid, and I saw it around at the same time as Braveheart. Now Braveheart's like obviously much more bombastic and full of action scenes, and it was like much more the film of that year. But Rob Roy's excellent. It's so good.
Who does that have?
So it's got a great cast. Well, it's Liam Neeson as Rob Roy. Jessica Lange is his wife. Who else is there? There's Tim Roth is fantastic. He's is it Archie Cunningham? He's this kind of evil English like blackguard who basically gets attached to gets assigned to like sort of hunt down Rob Roy. He's like delicious, like a fantastic villain. John Hurt is really good. He plays one of the kind of like lairds who ends up sort of double crossing Rob. Anyway, it's a really good film. It's a really great script. It's like kind of just really smart and funny, and yeah, it's a really great time and really kind of undervalued. I think it's kind of forgotten about, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. So that was good to revisit.
So when I was at, like you saying Braveheart just now reminded me, I was at the pro-Palestinian protest over the weekend, and there was like an Egyptian sort of lefty radical guy that like gave a speech. And there was like a point where he was like, and I know that like all of you, like there is a film that I am thinking of. It is called Braveheart. Oh my God. And there is a line from that film, and it is freedom. And it was the most Arab fucking thing I'd ever seen in my life. It was so fucking nice. And the crowd like truly went wild. It was really lovely. So that's why I've been thinking about Braveheart recently.
Now on to Killers of the Flower Moon from that plucky young filmmaker, Martin Scorsese. So this is the 26th film by Martin Scorsese. It sees him reunite with his two favourite actors, Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro. And the film tells the story of a conspiracy in the 1920s in Oklahoma to murder people of the Osage Nation, who had become the wealthiest people in America at the turn of the 20th century because oil had been found on the land that they'd been forcibly moved to by the US government. In the film, Leonardo DiCaprio plays Ernest Burkhart, who's a dim lad who was a cook during the war and who's been taken under the wing by his uncle Bill Hale, who likes to be called King, and he's played by Robert De Niro. Now, Bill is the kind of local rancher, and he seems to be well regarded in the community. He calls himself a friend of the Osage people, and he encourages Ernest to find an Osage wife. And Ernest takes a shine to Molly. Molly is played by Lily Gladstone, and it seems at first this is a fairy tale romance, but very quickly people in Molly's family and other members of the Osage community begin to die in incredibly suspicious circumstances, which, after a lot of pleading from Molly, gets the attention of the newly formed FBI. The film is an epic three-hander with DiCaprio, Gladstone and De Niro, but the supporting cast is also stacked. It includes Jesse Plemons, Brendan Fraser, Larry Sellers, John Lithgow. The list goes on. Ellie, you sat down at 9 o'clock in the morning with me to watch this very long movie. It's a struggle to, at that time, was it a struggle to watch?
It wasn't a struggle to watch. It's that thing really where, Oppenheimer is another huge epic film that's come out this year, and I was feeling the runtime on Oppenheimer not quite in the same way that I was feeling it with Killers, which I think is a sign that you're enjoying yourself. And yeah, I saw the trailer for Killers first when I went to go see Oppenheimer, and I typically don't like trailers at all because I just think they generally misrepresent films or they reveal too much plot or whatever. And this wasn't the worst trailer, but yeah, if you have seen it, because I think this will be coming out before Killers is out, the trailer makes it look like some fucking balls to the wall, white knuckle, kick-ass, explode-a-thon revenge epic. But that is sort of just because all trailers are like the Michael Bayification of the film they're trying to sell. But having watched it now, the most interesting difference in the film itself is that the action of the film feels quite incidental. There isn't some airtight, really well-defined conspiracy. The master plan isn't all that masterful. Stuff keeps going wrong. There's a target who's shot not in the front of the head but the back of the head, so everyone freaks out because it was supposed to look like a suicide. And there's a point where Leo DiCaprio has to get someone to carry out another hit, and he's talking to this local guy. He's like a moonshiner or something like that, and he's like, "Go get him right now." And the guy's like, "But I don't want to go get him right now. I'm here. I'm working my job, and I don't want to lose my job." And Leo DiCaprio's like, "Well, that doesn't matter. You got to go and get him right now." And the guy's like, "But I don't want to go." And he's like, "I don't care if you don't want to go. You got to go." And it's like this goes on for like 5-10 minutes, and it's like these people are fucking idiots. They're just going on and on in a loop with no new arguments or anything like that. Like. They just feel very impotent as characters. And then, of course, the second the FBI comes in, they put 2 and 2 together and arrest the right guy. It's never about who did it or how they did it. The only, like, real question the film asks is, like, where is Leonardo DiCaprio's character going to wind up, who has these split allegiances? But the fact that, like, yeah, this is, like, a very hasty and, you know, discordant plot makes it more of a tragedy because this, you know, this conspiracy against the Osage people, it's so opportunist, it's so easy to foil, and yet its victims seem so powerless against it. It like highlights this very like complacent attitude of their community, this the surrounding people, the settlers of the New West, they're like very comfortable and hushed up about the genocide that's happening around them. And you know, the Osage are not just a community that have been pushed to the brink of extinction, but in fact, like the fact that their population is so small has led to characters being disposed to like genetic disorders, and we watch the individual characters themselves slowly perish of diabetes, and it just further serves their vulnerability and creates this atmosphere of death that's sort of lingering throughout the entire film, which to me is like what overlapped greatly with The Irishman. So instead of having Robert De Niro, his old age in a nursing home at the, you know, framed narrative, explore this impending mortality that Scorsese is interested with, it's done by the endangered Osage people. Some of the story structure of The Irishman seems a little lifted out to me. Like Leonardo DiCaprio feels sort of like the same character Robert De Niro was in The Irishman, right? He's like an unthinking thug who's very complacent in this grand conspiracy, but only when he's kind of asked to betray someone does he really have to contemplate the violence of his actions and how it's damaged his family. You know, an example is that like Robert De Niro's character's kids in The Irishman have about as many lines as Leonardo DiCaprio's kids in Killers of the Flower Moon. But what sets Flower Moon apart is this like really wonderfully rendered setting. It's very immersive. There's this little motif, I don't know if you noticed this throughout, of like photography and how like the Osage people are getting these like photograph portraits done, and it's like we're constantly being reminded that there's this new technology that's just, it's never really stated, but clearly like capturing things and recording things, which, you know, sort of tethers this story to how people feel about it now and how it's kind of like this underappreciated thing, just how violent America was in the 1920s towards like Native Americans. But yeah, like the sort of the question that the film really asks, the theme that it really explores is whether or not Leonardo DiCaprio is going to side with his sort of, you know, Machiavellian uncle or this family that he's made. These are the two poles of the film, and they're both such strong performances.
Yeah. No, I agree. I just continue to be blown away by Martin Scorsese. You know, he's just the consummate filmmaker. You know, he tells these kind of huge, sweeping stories with tons of style and confidence. But the film also feel kind of intimate as well. I think that's the difference between this and Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer doesn't feel like an intimate film, whereas this actually really does, even though it's got the similar scale. And it hits the ground running with this incredible opening sequence, because I actually didn't know much about the Osage people at all. Like it was just my ignorance, but like I did not realise that they had this weird position where the land they were moved to gave them this incredible wealth, and they had this kind of weird upheaval of social hierarchy where suddenly the Native American people were the richest people in town, and you have this kind of opening section. It's shot to look like silent film footage, probably because that's what you would have in the day, so it's just copying the style of the day. But you know, so you have this kind of weird image of all these Native Americans in furs, all glammed up, in cars, you know, having these kind of wild parties, and their servants are all white people, you know, and so it's like it's having fun with this kind of upheaval, but there's also kind of a menace because you can tell that the white people are not happy with this. They're looking on with such jealousy at this kind of swaggering people with their kind of bling and their kind of finer things. So that's a really great way to open it, and it really introduces you to, you know, this kind of interest in period America. So initially, like you say, part of the what you mentioned, the photography, part of the reason they're also trying to get the Osage people to get photographs because they're the only people who can afford it. It's a bit like, when you go, when you go on holiday, and what happens is all the local kids, if you go to like a poor place, the local kids will try and take your photo. That's the kind of feeling it gives. It's so like the poor people here are the white people who are trying to get the Osage people to just give them money. So they're basically panhandling and doing all these kind of little jobs for them. So that's interesting. But obviously, Robert De Niro. And now I'm not allowed to spoil too much here, but shall we say Robert De Niro wants a cut of this cash?
Yeah,
I think it's fair to say that. And that, to me, that's what surprised me about the film, because of that, it kind of feels like a really classic Martin Scorsese crime film. So I went into this thinking, this is going to be a bit more like, The Age of Innocence or something, Martin Scorsese, or Condon, like his more kind of historical films. But actually, it feels much more like Goodfellas or Casino or The Irishman. That's the kind of feel it's got these kind of, they're not the mafia, but Bill and Ernest, they are kind of an organised gang. They are systematically and methodically trying to get their money from the Osage people, and they're doing it in a quite interesting way. Again, I was kind of surprised. It's like a kind of like, it's a bit of a honey trap. They're basically using Leonardo DiCaprio because he's pretty. Mm-hmm. He's trying to get him married off to this woman, and the idea is like once he's married, he has a stake in the oil, and if he gets rid of the wife and the rest of the family, he can own the oil. And it's such a Machiavellian plan, but it's very interesting that it's doing it using Leonardo DiCaprio's looks, as being the kind of like hunk who's going to seduce her. But the film's got a really interesting, rich central thing going, because like what's different from Goodfellas and Casino, it's also got this stuff about family life. So like you say, it's got Leonardo DiCaprio at home with Lily Gladstone, who's fantastic. And this is what I think gives the film a really interesting wrinkle, is we're never exactly sure how much of their relationship is genuine. It's actually quite hard to tell, especially a lot of this stuff is of what the extent of how involved Leonardo DiCaprio is within this kind of plan. Because, like I say, he is a dullard. He's not the smartest guy in the box. He could be just being manipulated as well. You're never exactly sure how much he knows of the plan. And how much he's involved, or if he's just like following along because he's scared of his uncle. So that's interesting, and I think maybe a part of me that lets it down is I disagree. I don't think Leonardo was that great an actor, and I feel he was maybe working a bit too hard. Like I never quite knew. I don't think he communicates enough. Because it's not in the script. He's meant to communicate how he's feeling, and I don't think I can never understand. Does he love her or not? And I think that was one thing at the heart of the film that didn't quite work. But everything else is fantastic. I think Gladstone's really interesting. She knows he's a gold digger. She knows that white men want to marry Native American women for the money, but she kind of does it anyway because she knows he's a coyote, but he also thinks he's a nice guy, and she says, "Well, it's just money. I can share it with him." I don't think she understands the extent of the kind of the plan.
I've heard it's like really her film. Is what
it's interesting that like earlier on you were saying that it's hard to tell where these characters land. That it's hard to tell when they're being genuine and when they're not. It's like Lily Gladstone and Robert De Niro are kind of foils. Like they are both sort of really difficult to read. The second that you meet Robert De Niro, he's incredibly sweet and charming, but he's like a scary dude. Like you're immediately like, I'm not buying this, and he never lets go of this facade the entire film, no matter what happens. Whereas on the other hand, Lily Gladstone is like very like quiet and aloof and doesn't say much. Like I think that's how she's introduced, like is Robert De Niro describing her, saying like she doesn't talk much. Don't feel like you have to fill in the silence, because when they don't talk much, that they're just waiting for the idiots to come out. But at the same time, you get the sense that she is like very like full of emotion and like so it's just like it's very interesting that they've got these sort of dichotomy, right? These characters are the poles of the film, and Leonardo DiCaprio is meant to be this sort of moron who's like caught between these two incredibly intelligent, strategic people.
Yeah, but the thing is, there's lots of things that I was unexpected as well, because it's such a long film, and it's one thing, it's this kind of romance with this kind of crime story on top of it, and then it becomes like a different film. It's like an FBI investigation happens, like you must be 2 hours in, and then the FBI turn up and it becomes like an investigation, and then it becomes a court case. So there's like there's a whole mix of genres going on, and it's so impressively put together. The music is fantastic. You have Thomas Shoemaker's doing like just her editing is incredible to tie all this together. I'm sure there must have been tons of footage. Like it seems like it's like that type of film where there's probably there's lots of scenes that actually just play out almost like improvised. Like you say, there's that long scene with Leonardo DiCaprio trying to convince this guy to do a murder. There's also a great scene between him and Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro's asking him like, so are you into women? What women do you like? And he has this kind of big long ramble. Says, I like big women, I like small women. It's like I like red women, I like black women. It's like, and it's like it goes on for ages. And it's like, and it's a crazy thing, isn't it? He's so good at this, where he kind of charms you. Like he makes you like these awful people, and I think that's why some people dislike Scorsese. They sort of think he's glamorizing them, and you can never say he glamorizes these people at all. You by the end, you see they are the worst people in the world, but he's so good at kind of making you kind of sit along for the ride and sort of enjoy their banter and stuff like that. So that's what makes this film so troubling. When you watch something like Goodfellas, you kind of do enjoy hanging out with these guys until you realize how vile they are. And it's exactly the same here. When it becomes clear exactly what's going on, it makes you so angry that you have like been complicit in it almost. So it's great filmmaking. It also has some amazing cameos, like Brendan Fraser turns up and he's like this bombastic lawyer. He's hilarious. He has like 2 lines and both of them are just...
He like shouts. Like he's just like, he shouts everything he says. I think there's like 2 scenes, one where he's in the courtroom, one where he's like counseling Leonardo DiCaprio, and like the camera zooms in real close on his face and he like leans towards you.
And he must just be, this is about the time of the whale, because he's got the whale weight. And he's just huge and booming, and like he just like appears, and he's like, it's such a shock. He's great. John Lithgow is the other lawyer. So yeah, you have these kind of fun courtroom scenes, a lot of fun scenes. I think Jesse Plemons is kind of great as this kind of
the FBI guy.
Investigator.
Yeah.
So it's a really rich film. The music is by Robbie Robertson, who just died recently, who was like a great friend of Martin Scorsese. He was in the band called The Band, and that's what The Last Waltz was. So the music is fantastic. It's just got such a for such a long film, it's just got such a great pace. It kind of bobs along. It's really upsetting, actually. It's like it's I think it's like, I've compared to Goodfellas or Casino. These people, I must say, are worse than any character Scorsese's put on screen. Really troubling.
I think like a big part of that as well is the fact that Robert De Niro, who's pulling all these threads and doing all this like evil doing. He's not unwealthy. He's got the biggest cattle ranch. He's got this huge house, and it's sort of like, I think it's very much like Scorsese always shows that kind of like Shakespearean thing of like, how Shakespeare showed like kings and generals and stuff like that. Scorsese always looks at people who are like grappling with power or who are already in positions of power, because these are the people that want power the most. They want more wealth. They want more weapons and that's kind of the thing. It's like this huge tragedy that's happening, and you're kind of like, what for? These guys are already rich. How much more rich could they be? And one thing that I do really like about this film, about you saying it being like tragic, is that there's lots of violence, but none of it is sensationalized. There's a way in which that violence is depicted, in which it's like usually just like one shot at a distance. There's no like accompanying musical sting or anything like that. There's no struggle. It's just like a gunshot ringing in silence, and then we move on to the next scene. And there's no like gratuitous close-ups or ridiculous like fight scenes or anything like that. It's just that the violence is shown from a very like disconnected and very emotionless distance.
Yeah, or you might see the aftermath of the violence as well, which is also very shocking. Yeah, it's a great kind of film about the birth of America. I know America had been going for like a bit well, but it's like this was such a lawless place and like a place of violence and greed, and essentially it's the same place. Like America's not changed. People are still ruthless and obsessed with money and status. And yeah, I think it's a great film about this time in history, but it's also a kind of state of the nation film, I think.
It's also like you say, Jesse Plemons is great as this FBI guy, but it's another interesting sort of like piece of trivia about the setting that nobody knows what the FBI is. Nobody's ever heard of it. I don't actually know really when the FBI was formed, or I think
wasn't this their first major investigation?
Yeah, this is.
He calls it he just calls it the BOI, the Bureau of Investigation. So before they'd added the federal or whatever, but it's just sort of like no one knows what this means and like why it's a big deal that these guys have come from out of town to investigate this. And it's like, oh, are they Pinkertons? Are they Pinkertons? Like, no, they're not Pinkertons. They say that they've been sent by the government. So it's again like just another little like fact that really fleshes out this world and makes it feel really immersive, that people are surrounded by novelty.
And it also has genuinely one of the best endings of any film. Like, I think it ends in such a way, and I won't spoil it, but it has such a delightful ending that is
energy emanating off
that
me
again.
right now.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll just say it will make you so angry at the ending, but also will make you smile because there's something that happens that which is it's a really nice ending.
Okay.
So Killers of the Flower Moon is. Oh well, actually, we should ask Annie. You didn't see the film, but is there anything you want to add on Scorsese? Is there any,
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously lots to say about his filmmaking. I have not seen all of it. I've just kind of seen bits and pieces, which I do think he is obviously like a genius. What I would like to flag up is his World Cinema project that he has done. I think whenever people like do this whole like fucking Scorsese versus Marvel debate, blah, 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 they always kind of position it, or they often position it from like a filmmaking perspective, or from a taste perspective. But I think for me, it is about like, how are these people viewing cinema as like a medium and as something that can either be like capitalized and exploited and like commercialized, or as something that is like art. And I think Scorsese has always like been in the latter camp, and that's kind of why I respect him rather than that the films are better. Like, do you know what I mean? But yeah, he has this World Cinema project where he has helped to like restore and preserve and kind of release, I think, 54 films from Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, Central America, South America, and the Middle East. So one of them made it into my top 10 for the Sight and Sound poll, which I think we talked about very briefly when I watched it last year, which is Chess of the Wind, which is that Iranian film that was lost for literally decades because the Shah banned it, and then the regime banned it, and then they literally just found it in old film cylinders in like a charity shop or something in Iran, which is wild, and he helped restore it. And then like Black Girl, which is Ousmane Sambin, which is like a 1966 film from Senegal, which I think is now on BFI Player. So just, yeah, these really major films, and he does a lot. I think sometimes when you kind of like hold someone up on a pedestal the way that I think people often hold Martin Scorsese up, it can be easy for them to kind of isolate themselves within, but he has always been a very sort of like community minded person. And the fact that he doesn't like Marvel isn't that he's trying to kind of create an ivory tower, it's that he's actually trying to expand it in the places where it hasn't been allowed to expand. I think that's really beautiful. So yeah, big fan. Love him. What a man.
I think he's also part of it. It definitely helped Michael Powell when he was like out in the cold as well. Like I know that he brought Michael Powell on to be like an advisor on his film when Michael Powell just couldn't get work. He was like selling porcelain ducks to make money.
Wow.
And he introduced Michael Powell to
Thelma.
Yeah,
That's so
and
cute.
that's how they got together. So yeah, like helping filmmakers all over. Although I don't know what you think of this. Do you think there's a kind of Agnes Vardification of Martin Scorsese happening? Like, like, because obviously when Agnes Varda, she became such a kind of like like a national treasure, like a global treasure, I guess would be the word. People loved her so much, but I felt like they kind of undermined her as being like a great filmmaker. That she became like, the cute little lady from France.
Yeah.
And I feel that's maybe happened to Martin Scorsese a little bit.
I think a little bit, yeah, especially the older he's got. Like, it is that thing, right, with the little TikToks that he makes with his daughter that is like a little bit like, aw. But it is also just really funny. Did you see the latest one where she was teaching him slang?
No.
She was like teaching him slang, and she would like teach him through his films. So she was like, slept on, like people slept on Raging Bull. And then he'd be like, oh, it means that they didn't like it at the time. And it was like, oh, babes.
That's cute.
It was nice.
But the thing is, we're doing that, and he's still such a potent filmmaker. He's at the absolute height of his powers here. And I don't know, I feel like, I get it. Like, I feel such affection for him as well, but I also respect him so much as a filmmaker.
Yeah. 100%.
Whether or not Killers of the Flower Moon uses TikTok memes in it.
Yeah. So Killers of the Flower Moon is released the 20th of October. You can also see Mean Streets, which is out right now. That was re-released on the 13th of October for its 50th anniversary. That was the first film he ever worked with Robert De Niro. And look at them now. They're still working away. Yeah, so go and see it. So I mentioned at the top of the show there is a major arrival right now of Pearl and Pressburger films in cinemas across Scotland, and that includes a national restoration and re-release of one of their lesser-known films, I would say. That's the 1945 film I Know Where I'm Going. So I Know Where I'm Going follows a materialistic young woman named Joan Webster, who's played by Wendy Hiller. She's engaged to marry this very rich industrialist who's twice her age. And when we meet her, she's travelling to his island called Killorn in the Hebrides to be married. But unfortunately, the changeable Scottish weather has her trapped on the neighbouring island of Mull. So unable to make the crossing, she has to kind of wait for the storm to die down. And while she does that, she meets a salt of the earth naval officer called Torkin McNeil, who's played by Roger Livesley. And he introduces her to the simple ways of the island life. It's a bit of a swooning romance, I thought. Annie, maybe we'll start with you. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I thought this was sexy. People don't argue like this anymore. It was really nice. Yeah, I think this kind of film embodies the female fantasy that you'll have like this boyfriend, but he'll be really, really cringe, and then someone better will come along and be like, babes, no. Which never happens. But it's nice that it happens on film. Like, it's really lovely. I have only seen 2 Powell and Pressburger films before this, which is A Matter of Life and Death and The Red Shoes. And they are both incredibly, on like a sort of aesthetic level, incredibly lavish, with these like big set pieces and like kind of special effects essentially, like for the time, that were like really incredible. Whereas this felt like a little bit smaller, and it was really interesting to see them operating at a slightly smaller scale. Having said that, it's one of those films that as you're watching it, just the visuals of it make you feel like tingly, you know, like there are these like gorgeous kind of shots of them in the Highlands, and they're like silhouetted against the landscape, and it's like this kind of romantic painting. There's this bit, I think, where does he reach up to like a lamp, or she reaches up to a lamp, and there's something about the way that it's shot where it's like just diagonally looking up at it, and there's this kind of real like subjectivity to the filmmaking of how it kind of, it's like both grand but also very intimate at the same time, which I really, really loved. Yeah, they just have like a really sexy time. There's one argument they have on the stairs. I was like, good for you. And it is just very romantic in a way that we'll talk a little bit about in a bit, but A Matter of Life and Death was as well, where the romance is just like so everyday. Like it is just, it's not about these being the funniest or the prettiest or the whatever people, in a way that I think a lot of the cinema coming out of the screwball comedies, where it was just like such an emphasis on like wittiness and banter and this kind of quite staged, which I fucking love. But this, there's something about it that is just very like, these people just like meet each other and they really like each other, and it feels like a much more naturalistic, I think, depiction of how like attraction and romance work. I think that makes it more romantic in a way. So yeah, I really, really loved it. I keep meaning to watch more of their stuff because I've not seen a film of theirs that I haven't like adored, but I keep not, which is the whole thing. But yeah, really, really beautiful. I will say, Scottish accents.
Yeah.
What's happening there?
Like, this is the thing. I'm not as familiar with like Golden Age cinema history or like the history of screenwriting, so I can't say for sure, but this does seem like the progenitor of a certain type of trope, which is the ambitious, like work-minded girl moves to the countryside with the hopes of, you know, marrying or promotion or increasing your social status or whatever, but then unexpectedly falls in love with the locals and their very quaint way of life. And that's not disparaging. Like
It's
Hallmark
the Hallmark Christmas movie.
Christmas movies do this for a reason. I think they look back to this film because it is actually like, it's got very like sweet DNA, you know, it's like very feel good. And I think that I Know Where I'm Going ran so that Castle for Christmas could stumble head first into a ditch. And like Castle for Christmas, like part of the fun of watching it as a Scottish person is like looking around and like, I don't think that's a real Scottish accent. It's getting like that one was okay, but this one's getting a little bit Mrs. Doubtfire. And then you also like cheer when they mention like Buchanan Street Station or something like that. But I don't think that it's like Scottish fetishism in I Know Where I'm Going. Like I don't think that it's tourist fodder. Like Powell and Pressburger do seem interested in giving the setting the depth that it deserves. Like there's, you know, local myths about like cursed castles, and then like there's tertiary characters who are like falling in love during Cayley. There's the Corryvreckan whirlpool, which as far as I'm aware is like actually like a big thing in Hebridean mythology, and you know it makes the set of this like very dynamic sequence where they're like, you know, having to cross the fucking gulf, and it's like really, really chaotic. The film has like a lot more mobility than in the average romance film. Like instead of I think that what you've identified, this like, you know, this really nice film where people are allowed to just like get to know each other at their own pace. It's because I think that like, you know, if it were maybe a little bit more, a bit more, you know, comic, then, you know, you would have had them like trapped in the same hotel or something, or some unwitting thing like that. But here they're both kind of given free rein to like wander around the island. So like we get to see lots of scenes with Joan Webster, our main character, by herself, as we do with this love interest of hers. So like, I don't know. I think that's really interesting. It's like a very realistic and just like very well-paced way of developing a relationship. And I think that's why you're kind of invested in it by the end.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I love it. It's got such a kind of lovely tone, and it's and the thing is, I do love those screwball comedies, and there's a little bit of screwball in here, and it's the kind of will they, won't they, kind of like classic, you know, rom-com tropes basically, but it's also its own little flavour. You know, it's got a little kind of, like you say, the Gaelic folklore in there. You know, there's like a big section that's basically a seafaring adventure where they do look they're almost going to die. So it's got like a really lovely tone. Like it's got this joyful opening sequence as well. Like I forgot, like I'd seen it years ago.
The credits.
Like where it's like we introduced to like Joan, and we see like the first like 25 years of her life in this kind of like little shorthand, which is just lovely. I love her trip in the sleeper up,
Or like
up
very
to
like psychedelic trip through Tartan Hills.
yeah, it's like very obviously like a fake train. Like I love the artifice that they just bring in straight away. Like they like, okay, it's a fake train. How will we? They don't try and because they actually have it go through like this tartan valley. It's like it's beautiful. And then I think we were just talking about this on the way up. Like Joan's dreams while she's on the train are hilarious as well. She's like she's marrying this guy, but obviously she's doing it for his money. And she's so upfront, and she's having these dreams about marrying his factory and imagining all the money that it's making. And it's just like she's awful, really. She's like just this like materialistic person, but she's just so sweet as well. Like there's a lovely scene where her and what's Roger Lively's name? Torquil. Yeah, Torquil. They're walking around and she's saying, "Oh yes, the people around here, I presume they're really poor." She says, "Oh, they're not poor. They just don't have much money." And it's like that's just like sums up the film. It's like it's like a film about like. Just saying like life isn't about like being rich, you know. Like, they're having so much fun like hanging out with the woman who has like tons of dogs.
The woman who owns the hotel with the tons of dogs is, I think, one of the sexiest people I've ever seen in my life.
She just walks in the windswept. She's got like I think the like lurchers just around her. Like
that was
like,
so hot.
She's chaos. I love it. And you've got the like, and it's like the very kind of British thing. Like you've got these the eccentric character, the eccentric major who has like an eagle that may or may not be killing all the sheep on the. You know, it's got all these lovely little details, which I love. And it's basically a film about like the antagonist in the whole film is Scottish weather and how bad it is. But like also it makes you want to go to Mull. Like despite the fact there's a gale blowing, it just looks beautiful. And I think part of why it looks so good actually is an interesting fact that I only found out before I saw it, and you spot it straight away. But do you know how you say they're always like shown on the landscape as these little dots? It's because actually Roger Lively was booked at the time. He's actually not on Mull. He's in a studio. So when you see the long shots and they're like on a moor or something like that, that's just a stand-in. And then when it goes to close-up, it goes to a studio, and it's just like seamlessly done. But actually, if you know it's and part of the reason there was a mix-up is it was meant to be James Mason who's going to be the Laird, but James Mason came and he said, "I'm not going to stay in Scotland for a week. Are you kidding me? I don't want to. I can't live in Mull for like a month. Are you mad?" But then it's funny that Roger Lively got to do it in the studio anyway. But they kind of worked around it. But yeah, so there's like it's just like great filmmaking. It's like almost a perfect script. You know, it's like you can see that, you know, if you're talking about rom-com being like this kind of amazing kind of mechanism, you can see all the kind of little cogs going, but it's just perfect. Really, really enjoyable. Just get lots of fun sequences. And yeah, it's like a romance where it's not. It's interesting, like it's almost like imperceptible. You can't actually see the moment they fall in love. It's like it just happens. I think it's maybe actually at the Ceilidh.
It's at the Ceilidh. I was going to say there's this one scene where they're standing outside the Ceilidh and she's leaning back against something at the diagonal, and he is standing with his like arms braced around her but not touching her. And I was like, dude.
Yeah, it's like oh whoa.
Yeah, like I'm surprised that passed the code. To be honest, it's fucking nuts.
Yeah, she's like, I think I want to go home. He says, no, you're staying. Yeah. You're gonna have a dance.
So hot.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, great film. But that's on re-release this week as well on the 20th. But as I mentioned, there is going to be this big Pelham Pressburger retrospective, and I thought it'd be a good time just to talk about some other Pelham Pressburger films. So does anybody want to jump in? Annie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. So I would urge everyone to see, and I think they will, it's one of their most famous ones, A Matter of Life and Death, which came out in the year after this. Or no, hang on, when did this one come out?
This was 45.
45, yeah. Okay, 1946, yeah, the year after this. Actually, that's so interesting to see like how bigger within a year the scale of their films got. So A Matter of Life and Death is about a RAF pilot who falls in love with a girl and then he dies, right? Is that the premise?
Yeah.
And then he's kind of like in like at the gates of heaven, sort of like negotiating to like go back down to earth. That's what happens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. For some reason, I was like having it mixed up. Yeah, that's what happens. I do love this film. I just have a very bad memory, but I do love this film. It was also in my Sight and Sound top 10. And yeah, it's kind of got David Niven. I think Roger Livesey is also in it. Just like the kind of usual suspects. And the way that it's filmed is that normally with these things, you would expect that kind of the supernatural part of it is like full color and full like fantasy, but that bit's all in like black and white, and then like everything on earth is in color. And so it's kind of, I think, a really, really beautiful and very ahead of its time kind of understanding of like these sort of like religious structures that we have, that it's like, well, no, like life is the point, that there's kind of like adulation of like what comes after, like you're living life now, and that's like the point, and that's the good thing. And there's something really beautiful in the way that they find like color and meaning in just like the everyday stuff. There's this point where I think they like meet, and then they kind of meet again after a bit of a war, and they see each other for the first time. And there's like an expression on her face that is just so like, just like makes me cry. It's so beautiful. And again, it has like this real, even though it's like a much bigger kind of scale and it's like a lot more fantastic, just a real like intimacy about like how people make connection, how like that sort of, yeah, like the bonds that you form with people and how attached you become, and how there is so much significance in that. Like it's a very, yeah, like a really humanist film, I think. So yeah, I would really recommend that one. I think especially like up on like a big screen, because yeah, the scenes in heaven, they're like in this gorgeous like drained like black and white, and there's this huge fucking staircase that's like going up, and then these like angels, and it's just really, oh, it's just like, yeah, it just feels so very similar to It's a Wonderful Life, I would say, in that kind of, it's feel good, but like not because it's schmaltzy or that bad things don't happen, but it's understanding that those things are also part of life, which is what makes you like feel like the good things are really worth holding on to, which I think is really nice. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I should mention, but obviously they're making a lot of these films just during the war.
Yeah,
like you know, like this. That's why he's an RAF pilot. You know, the war has just obviously ended, but when it comes out, Roger Livesley's character in I Know Where I'm Going is a naval officer who's on leave, who's going back to the war as well. So that's
and she's a very war character actually, and I Know Where I'm Going. Like
Yeah.
it really is that model of like the woman in the 40s that had started to work, that had started to kind of have this like independence and like kind of strength of mind and like the agency with which to kind of be able to do that. Like, yeah, very kind of the way that she talks is like, oh, you've worked in the factories.
Yeah.
Like you now have autonomy.
So yeah, I just like the idea that they're making these films almost as like part of the war effort. You know, I feel like there is. I mean, I think some people do criticize them for being a bit like what's the word? Very kind of middle class and kind of like, you know, kind of. The characters are very kind of RP, you know. You know, it doesn't feel like it's not. It's very different from what comes later in British cinema, where it's like, you know, kitchen sink realism and stuff. So I think they are slightly criticised, but they are making it during the war effort, and I can see why these films would be what people want to go and flock to see. You know, they're very life affirming. They are saying, you know, what a time to have seen a film like A Matter of Life and Death when you've had like bombings of your city and stuff like that. You know, like death would have been on people's minds, and then to see this film, you know, saying like, you know, life is important, life is the colourful part, would be, yeah, especially in grey Britain in the 1940s. I think it would be kind of wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen another one.
Oh.
Sorry.
Which
Just
one?
to say, I've also seen, which I forgot this was them, The Tales of Hoffman,
Oh yeah,
which is really beautiful, which is kind of like,
that's a crazy film.
it is crazy. It reminds me a lot of almost like Disney's Fantasia. Like
Yeah.
it's kind of takes place on a stage, and it's, but I did,
Yeah.
my master's thesis was on E.T.A. Hoffman's short stories.
Ah.
Yeah, so it's like a lot of those kind of that take place, and it's like very kind of theatrical and like almost like a little anthology film. It's very cool.
It's almost like the ballet sequences in A Red Shoes, but
Yes,
extended.
yeah,
you know.
to a whole film. Yeah, it's sick.
So if you like the Red Shoes,
Yeah.
you know, this is the Red Shoes on steroids.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a great story. I've got a great story about this with Martin Scorsese. Sorry to go off subject, but this is just a little thing I saw on Twitter a few weeks ago, which is beautiful. So when Martin Scorsese was a kid, he used to rent out The Tales of Hoffman, like on like I presume on like film. Like he so he used to get like so he lived in New York in the Bronx or something, and there was like this one reel of Tales of Hoffman that he would go and rent. But then he found out one week it wasn't there. And he was like, oh my God, I want to see this one because one of his favourite films and he rewatched it again and again. And he had to wait for it to come back. And it turns out the other person who had it was George Romero, the horror director. And like, they would just swap it over. Like, they would, like, so I want, I'm stealing somebody's idea. This is somebody on Twitter says they want this movie of like these two little cinephiles, these two little freaks who would go, we're like, what kind of 13-year-old kid goes to watch like Rent, Tales of Hoffman? So having like, Romero were good friends clearly, and they bonded over this. But like, yeah, that's just a little another
really
connection
cute.
to Pill and Pressburger. Ellie,
So I mean, like we were talking earlier about the really interesting set pieces from I Know Where I'm Going, like the the whirlpool scene and the the Tartan Hills dream, and that might be those might be interesting because as it turns out, the cinematographer for I Know Where I'm Going is Irwin Hillier or Hillier. I don't know, who turned out to be a protege of Fritz Lang. So that very like German expressionist sort of interesting, striking visual style and those uses of like dark and light colors might come from there. And once more, Powell and Pressburger collaborated with Hillier in A Canterbury Tale, which I was also interested in because they'd said that it was one of the two films they'd made, I Know Where I'm Going being the other one, of their crusade against materialism, which I thought was quite interesting. And I think that in I Know Where I'm Going, the crusade against materialism is quite obvious in that there's this option to marry an industrialist, and that kind of gets shirked. And there's even scenes where like the locals are bad mouthing what's his name, like Robert Bellinger is his name? Yeah, like they're saying he doesn't even eat salmon out the river. He buys salmon. What a lunatic. But in A Canterbury Tale, it's like far less of a point A to point B story. I think it's this fictitious village near Canterbury which just very like subtly imprints the values of small town life onto these three characters who've shown up here, and each of them are very like disillusioned because of the Second World War. And it's very loosely structured around the Canterbury Tales. Like, it doesn't have so much of plot as it does on the whole emphasis of like the journey is more important than the destination. So it can be a bit. We were talking earlier, like anthological. Yeah, anthological in that regard. We're not in a rush to get anywhere, like in I Know Where I'm Going, but we do like linger on the locals and get really like swept up in their lives. There's it's just like a really funny one. It's just there's this quote unquote gentleman farmer who doesn't want to hire the protagonist Alison, who's like recently arrived here as a land army girl, because she's a woman and the farm is occupied by soldiers. And he's like, oh, well, they might be interested in you. And she's like, let them be interested in me. They mean nothing to me. And it's like, fuck, queen shit. Get it, Alison. She's the best character by far. And I think it's what you were talking about earlier, Anahit, with like Powell and Pressburger showing like female characters with a lot of independence and autonomy because of the war. So like there's a point where Alison is talking to, I don't know, he's like an innkeeper or something like that, who's like, she says, so do you know that Mr. Culpeper guy? And he's like, do I know Mr. Culpeper? What would you say if I said, do you know the mayor of London? And she's like, but I don't know the mayor of London. And he's like, aren't you ashamed of that? And she's like, nah. She's like got a big smile on her face, like, no, not a bit. And what's keeping Alison anchored in this village is that when she's no longer wanted for her job, is that she like randomly takes on the investigation of this like local menace known as the Glue Man, a guy who randomly attacks women late at night by pouring glue in their hair.
Oh my gosh.
And it's right, like this is a golden age artifact right here, right? The way that they talk about this guy who is like targeting women in this like very bizarre way, it definitely comes from an age in history before any piece of art or media was allowed to acknowledge the existence of perverts. Like the victims just seem more like perplexed than bothered. They're like, oh, how weird. And then like the culprit eventually confesses. I won't spoil it, but he like confesses with this like very utilitarian motive. Like it turns out to have actually been a thought out way to like achieve something, and he gets away with a slap on the wrist. It's like,
if anyone poured glue in my hair, I would commit.
It's like demented, isn't it? Like, and it's not treated that way. It's so quaint that they can't even really acknowledge how fucked up this is. But like, it's like I Know Where I'm Going, where Powell and Pressburger like want to just uplift local legends and like village gossip and these sort of like pastoral cultures and their own little history. Like, they talk a lot about how like pilgrims came to Canterbury for the cathedral. And Alison turns out to have been married to a guy who's dead now, who was an archaeologist who found coins on this trail. So it's like that very like bizarre very fateful way that the characters turn out to be entwined with the setting. It makes it feel quite mythical. Like the introduction to the film, it sort of like is doing background on Canterbury, and you see a procession of medieval pilgrims, and one of them like casts its falcon up into the air, and by the time the camera's followed it, it's transformed into a Spitfire, and we're in World War II. And it's like that very like magical way that the film is like deployed very slowly, but it's still got that coziness, and it's still got like that sweetness that I Know Where I'm Going was, but it just lives up to this namesake with a really unconventional story structure and a really like great, fun, weird cast of characters.
It sounds amazing. I haven't seen that one, but I will try and check that one out. It sounds amazing. Yeah, the one I was going to recommend, well, I mean, I would say my favourite is probably The Red Shoes, but I think that's so well known, people might have seen it. If you just go and see it, it's mind-blowingly good.
Yeah.
But the one I was going to recommend was one I watched recently. It's called The Edge of the World. It's not a Pell and Pressburger film officially. It's a Michael Pell film, and this was actually the film that kind of got him the attention of Pressburger, and from then on, they made films together. This is like Michael Pell's like 21st film, but he'd been making all these kind of cheap, like low rent kind of film director for hire films in the kind of British film industry, and this was his first kind of real personal film. So it's about like the evacuation of St Kilda. That's what inspired it. So St Kilda, if you don't know, it's an island off of Scotland, which was evacuated, I think, in 1930, I'm going to say. And he sort of wanted to make a film about that island and why, and sort of imagine why they might have been evacuated. And it turns out into kind of like a kind of really interesting kind of family drama where like two friends basically argue the toss about what the island should do. So one of the friends has been to like Aberdeen and sort of saw the Aberdeen, the kind of, well, that's how cosmopolitan that is. Yeah, oh god, you should see the bright lights of Aberdeen. Anyway, he's been to Aberdeen. He's worked there, and he says like, we're really behind. Like the world has moved on in the last sort of 10, 20 years. We cannot live this way of life. It's an island where, this is before television, before like they didn't have any radios. They didn't have any way of communicating with the mainland. They didn't, so they would throw like messages in a bottle and hope like trawlers would find it so they could send for like doctors and things. It's like very kind of, you can see why people don't live there anymore. But anyway, so it's like it's basically it's two friends, one who wants them to leave and thinks you can't live like this anymore, and then one who says no, we need to stay and sort of follow in our ancestors' kind of way of living, and then to settle this argument, they both sort of have that they decide the way to settle it is by climbing to the top of the tallest cliff on the island without a rope and seeing who wins first. So as you might guess, it ends in tragedy, and it kind of tears the kind of place apart. But there's a kind of real kind of romance to it as well, because there's like one of the characters, his twin sister, is also in love with the other guy. So there's kind of like there's a kind of like real tension there between, she has to choose between her family and the man she loves. But it's just it's almost like, it's interesting comparing it to the films they made later, because they are, like you said before, Annie, they're so like grand and theatrical. This is like almost like a documentary. It's like very interested in just the way of life, so we see like how people sheared sheep back then, or we like sitting on a sermon. There's a very funny scene where they have like a really boring Calvinist sermon, and it's just like they make the boringness. He films it in such a fun way, and then it ends, and the priest is like, an hour and 15 minutes, let's see them beat that in Edinburgh. It's like it's got this real kind of charm and wit to it. I mean, he has a real kind of affection for this kind of way of life, and he kind of paints it in such a beautiful way. So it's just a really small, it's a much smaller film than he'd go on to make, but I think it's got all of the kind of stuff that he loves. So like landscapes and people and ways of life and sort of just communities. So that's what he seems to be interested in. So yeah, I would say check out that film. It's also Scottish, so it's interesting to watch it. That part of his kind of island double bill with is playing a lot with I Know Where I'm Going, and it's one of my Michael Pell, I think, was very fond of it, and he actually made a documentary about it as well. So I think GFT are showing it with a small documentary he made about the film, where they kind of go back and bring everybody back. It wasn't actually shot in St Kilda; they wouldn't let him shoot it there, but he shot it in Sheffield. I was going to say Sheffield. That's not right. In Shetland. That would be good.
The isolated island of Sheffield.
Yeah, so he shot it in a kind of an empty island just off of Sheffield. Why did I say Sheffield?
Time to end.
He shot it in Shetland, and yeah, it's just really wonderful. So I'd say basically you're going to have to be treated if you don't know much about Pell and Pressburger, because there's tons going on. So GFT have all the films we talked about. They have A Matter of Life and Death. They have I Can't Be Still. They have Edge of the World. They have The Red Shoes. They have Black Narcissus. They have Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. They have The Tales of Hoffman. They've got ones that I haven't heard of. Like, I didn't really know this film called The Sorcerer's Apprentice. I think it's a short film, perhaps. They're showing The Spy in Black, which is the first film they made together. They're showing Bluebeard's Castle. Loads of stuff. DCA also have tons. They're showing The Thief of Baghdad. They're showing Contraband, which is the second film together. Again, quite underseen. The Boy Who Turned Yellow, which is one of the kids' films they made in the 70s. So there's tons of stuff. Eden Court also has it. I'm sure other things will be announced. I would recommend seeing these on the big screen. A lot of them are shown in 35mm as well. There's lots of Q&As and there's lots going on. So I would really recommend that. I would say, in terms of plugs from us, the Cine Skinny Film Club is back in November. We're going to be showing How to Have Sex, the debut film by Molly Manning Walker.
It's so good.
Yeah, I cannot wait for that one. Tickets for that will be on sale this week. We're really looking forward to it. So we're at Summer Hall on the 7th of November, and we're at CCA in Glasgow on the 8th of November. I think we've made a podcast, guys. Is there anything else we have to say before we go?
I don't think so.
I think we're good.
Well, Ellie, Annie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Peter will be back on hosting duties next week. Don't worry, guys. Yeah, we're going to go back into the cold, and we'll see you all later.
Bye.
Bye.